It was a peaceful evening in Sarah's home. The sun had just set, casting a warm orange glow throughout the house. Sarah, a young woman in her late 20s, had just finished her nightly routine. She brushed her teeth, washed her face, and changed into her pajamas. With a content sigh, she turned off the lights, ready to settle into bed. But as she pulled back the covers, something caught her eye. There on her pillow was a note. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked it up. The handwriting was shaky, almost desperate. It read, "Get out while you still can." Sarah's mind raced. She lived alone. How had someone gotten into her house? She scanned the room, her eyes wide with fear, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But she was alone. The doors and windows were all locked. It didn't make any sense. She tried to shake it off, convincing herself it was a prank. But deep down, she knew it was something far more sinister. The note was a harbinger of the nightmare that was about to unfold. It was the first sign that her sanctuary was no longer safe, that something, or someone, was watching her. Sarah kept the note, a grim reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. Little did she know this was just the beginning. The whispers, the vanishing keys, and the strange footsteps were all connected, pieces of a puzzle that would soon reveal a horrifying truth. But for now, Sarah could only lie awake in the dark, clutching the note, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. She had no idea what was coming next, but she knew one thing for sure: her life would never be the same again. Before Sarah's ordeal with the whispering walls, the vanishing keys, and the strange footsteps in the attic, there was an incident that set the stage for the terror to come. It was a seemingly ordinary evening. Sarah had just finished her nightly routine and was ready to settle into bed. But as she pulled back the covers, she found something that made her blood run cold: a note on her pillow. The note was written in a shaky, almost desperate handwriting. It read, "Get out while you still can." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the room, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But she was alone. She lived alone. She checked the locks on her doors and windows, finding them all secure. How had someone gotten into her house, and why leave a note? The questions swirled in her mind, each one more terrifying than the last. She tried to convince herself it was a prank, but deep down, she knew it was something far more sinister. The note was a harbinger of the nightmare that was about to unfold. It was the first sign that her sanctuary was no longer safe, that something, or someone, was watching her. Sarah kept the note, a grim reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. Little did she know this was just the beginning. The whispers, the vanishing keys, and the strange footsteps were all connected, pieces of a puzzle that would soon reveal a horrifying truth. But for now, Sarah could only lie awake in the dark, clutching the note, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. She had no idea what was coming next, but she knew one thing for sure: her life would never be the same again. Before Sarah's ordeal with the vanishing keys and the strange footsteps in the attic, there was an unsettling incident that marked the beginning of her nightmare. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. Sarah had always enjoyed the quiet of her home, but one evening, as she was reading in her living room, she began to hear faint whispers. They seemed to emanate from the walls, a soft, almost inaudible murmur that sent chills down her spine. She turned off the television, thinking perhaps it was some interference, but the whispers continued. She pressed her ear to the wall, trying to make out the words, but they were just out of reach, like a distant conversation in a language she couldn't understand. The whispers seemed to move, drifting from one room to another, always staying just a step ahead of her. Sarah's friends dismissed her concerns, suggesting it was probably just the house settling or perhaps a draft. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The whispers grew louder over the following days, filling her home with an eerie presence that made her skin crawl. One night, as she lay in bed, the whispers seemed to gather around her, surrounding her in a cocoon of hushed voices. She pulled the covers over her head, praying for silence, but the whispers only grew more insistent. And then, just as quickly as they had started, they stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, a void that left her heart pounding in her chest. Sarah lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with fear and confusion. She knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. The whispers were a warning, a prelude to the terror that was about to unfold. Little did she know the vanishing keys and the strange footsteps in the attic were just the beginning of her descent into a living nightmare. Before the strange footsteps in the attic, Sarah had already been experiencing unsettling occurrences in her home. It all began innocently enough with her keys. Sarah was meticulous about keeping her keys on the small wooden hook by the front door. It was a habit, a routine she never broke. But one morning, as she was rushing out to work, her keys were gone. She searched everywhere, under the couch cushions, in the kitchen drawers, even in the pockets of the jacket she wore the day before. They were nowhere to be found. Frustrated and running late, she used her spare set and chalked it up to forgetfulness. But then it happened again, and again. Each time the keys would disappear from their usual spot, only to reappear in the most unexpected places. A bathroom cabinet, the freezer, even inside a shoe. It was as if they had a mind of their own, playing a cruel game with her. Sarah's friends laughed it off, suggesting she was just stressed or distracted. But Sarah knew better. She felt a growing unease, a sense that her home was no longer the safe haven it once was. The vanishing keys were just the beginning, a subtle warning of the more sinister events to come. One evening, after another futile search for her keys, Sarah sat down on her couch, trying to make sense of it all. She felt a cold draft, though all the windows were closed. Her eyes darted around the room, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. The silence was thick, almost tangible, broken only by the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Little did she know, the vanishing keys were just the first sign. Soon, the strange footsteps in the attic would follow, leading her deeper into a mystery that would turn her life upside down. Before the terrifying note on her pillow, Sarah had already been experiencing unsettling occurrences in her home. It all started a few nights earlier when she first heard the strange footsteps in the attic. It was late, and Sarah was engrossed in a book when she heard it, a faint, almost rhythmic thumping coming from above. She paused, listening intently, hoping it was just her imagination. But the sound persisted, growing louder and more distinct. Sarah lived alone in an old house that had its fair share of creaks and groans. But this was different. It was deliberate, like someone or something was moving around up there. Her heart pounded in her chest as she debated whether to investigate. Mustering her courage, she grabbed a flashlight and slowly ascended the narrow staircase to the attic. Each step creaked under her weight, amplifying her anxiety. The air grew colder as she reached the attic door, her breath visible in the dim light. With a trembling hand, she pushed the door open and shone her flashlight into the darkness. The beam cut through the dust-laden air, revealing old furniture and forgotten boxes, but no sign of life. The footsteps had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Sarah took a few tentative steps inside, her flashlight flickering as if in protest. She scanned the room, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. There was nothing out of the ordinary, yet the eerie feeling that she wasn't alone lingered. She backed out of the attic, closing the door firmly behind her. As she descended the stairs, the footsteps resumed, faint but unmistakable. Sarah's pulse quickened, and she hurried back to the safety of her bedroom, locking the door behind her. That night, she barely slept, haunted by the unexplained sounds and the gnawing fear that someone, or something, was watching her. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a series of events that would turn her life upside down. It was a quiet evening, and Sarah had just settled into bed after a long day. The house was still, with only the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards breaking the silence. As she drifted off to sleep, a sudden, loud thump echoed through the house, jolting her awake. Her heart raced as she sat up, straining to hear any other sounds. Sarah lived alone and prided herself on being rational, but in that moment, fear gripped her. She slowly got out of bed, her bare feet feeling the coolness of the floor. She grabbed her phone, its screen casting a faint glow, and tiptoed towards the hallway. Each step felt like an eternity, the silence amplifying her anxiety. She paused at the doorway, holding her breath as she listened. The house was eerily quiet once more. Summoning her courage, Sarah switched on the hallway light, flooding the space with a harsh, artificial brightness. She scanned the area, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow, but nothing seemed out of place. Convinced that it was just the house settling, she let out a shaky breath and headed back to bed. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a night she would never forget. Scene 2. She found a terrifying note on her pillow, and she lives alone. Emotion 5. Music, ominous, dramatic, haunting. Sarah woke up the next morning, feeling a bit silly for being so jumpy the night before. She stretched and turned to fluff her pillow, but what she found made her blood run cold. A note scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic handwriting lay on her pillow. The words sent a shiver down her spine. "I'm watching you." Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it. She lived alone, and there was no sign of forced entry. Panic set in as she realized that someone had been in her house while she slept. But who? And why? She grabbed her phone and called the police, her hands trembling as she dialed. As she waited for the authorities to arrive, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak, every shadow seemed menacing. The police arrived and searched the house thoroughly, but found no signs of an intruder. They told her it was likely a prank, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The rest of the day passed in a blur, and as night fell, Sarah found herself dreading bedtime. She double-checked the locks, closed all the curtains, and even set up a makeshift alarm system with pots and pans. Despite her precautions, sleep eluded her. As the hours ticked by, she lay in bed, wide awake, listening to the sounds of the night. And then, just as she was about to drift off, she heard it again. That same unmistakable thump. Her heart pounded as she sat up, clutching her phone. She knew she couldn't go through another night like this. Something had to be done. I'm sure you've heard the news. Stories of people finding strange and unsettling things in their homes. But this one is different. This one is personal. This one is terrifying. A woman found a note on her pillow. It was an ordinary night, or so she thought. She had gone to bed like any other night, expecting to wake up to the same routine. But that morning, everything changed. But she lives alone. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had no roommates, no visitors, no one who could have left the note. The sense of security she once felt in her own home was shattered in an instant. Imagine waking up to a handwritten note on your pillow saying, "You weren't supposed to wake up." The words echoed in her mind, each one more chilling than the last. Who could have written it? How did they get in? And why her? Chills run down your spine. Panic sets in. You live alone. The walls of your once safe haven now feel like they are closing in on you. The fear is real and it's overwhelming.